I just finished my first month flying on Frontier Airlines GoWild Unlimited Flight Pass, and it has been amazing for me. Whether it would work for you, that's a different story. Now, up until this year, I have been admittedly quite the Delta Prince. I had platinum status with them, which is the second to highest status, and I also have the American Express Reserve Delta co-branded credit card, which gives me lounge access and a number of other perks. But after through hiking the PCT and spending 5 months living in the woods and not flying as much, I lost it this year. So that is how I've ended up with Frontier. On top of losing my status, I also moved away from a Delta hub. I lived in Salt Lake City and then Los Angeles, but now I'm in Denver. And while Delta does have plenty of flights to Denver, it's not the same as living in a hub. So this fall, when I saw that Frontier has an unlimited flight pass that was on sale for $349 for more than a year, it's actually this entire year and goes until April, I believe mine does, of next year, it seemed a little too good to be true. I made sure I understood all of the catches, all the rules, all the regulations, and how it works. I also familiarized myself with Frontier's baggage policy, which is very different than my experience has been on Delta because I have gotten 2 free checked bags and I have not worried about packing light in years. But because I'm a full-time creator, I have a lot of flexibility in my life and I do this for work, it seemed like it made sense despite all of the limitations that the GoWild Pass has. So at the end of December, I pulled the trigger and I took my first GoWild flight on January 6th. So in the first month of 2026, actually it was the first 21 days of January, I took 7 flights and I got all of them at the GoWild fare, which is $16 one way domestic or per segment. That covers the taxes and fees and everything. So from those 7 flights, I spent a total of around $112. I also refused to pay to check a bag because it kind of defeats the purpose of this being so economical. I don't have the Frontier card. I'm not interested in another credit card, so I probably won't do that. So a huge part of this challenge was figuring out whether or not I could travel light enough to make this work. So the flights I took, it was 3 trips. So first I flew from Denver to San Antonio to go to Six Flags with a friend of mine. I have a season all parks pass, so I can go to any Six Flags or Cedar Fair owned park in the country. That's another video. On the way back, I had a layover in Orlando, so I flew San Antonio to Orlando and Orlando to Denver. Now, it should be noted if you pay those taxes and fees per segment. So since I had a layover on the way back, that trip back was $32 because you pay for each segment. The next trip was an overnight trip to New York City to see some friends. I flew Denver to JFK, and then on the way back, LaGuardia to Denver. And then the third trip was a trip to go to Universal Studios Orlando. I also have a season pass there. And my dad was also having a surgery. So I flew Denver to Orlando, and then for reasons completely unrelated to Frontier, I flew Tampa to Denver back. So those were the 3 trips I took in January on the GoWild Pass. And again, $112. So right there, no brainer for me. It's paid for itself. I could not fly another time. And for me, I won. And it's a pretty dramatic win because if I were to take average prices for those flights at that time of year on Delta, just the economy, that would be anywhere from $1,400 to $2,000. I mean, that's a rough guess. I did not actually find tickets, but that's a reasonable estimate for those flights. But with Frontier, without the GoWild Pass, that still would have been $450-ish to $700, just depending on availability. And that's what I mean when I say I've already made my money back. $350 plus, which is what I paid for the GoWild Pass, plus the $112 I paid for those tickets, puts me just over $450. So even if I was flying on Frontier for all of those flights without the GoWild Pass, I've made all the money back. So like anything that seems too good to be true, in some ways it is. There are some catches. They're not impossible to plan around, but you do need to know how it works in advance or you are going to find yourself very frustrated. The first thing is, usually and we'll get to the caveat, usually you can only book the GoWild fares the day before. So at midnight the day before. So if you're wanting to take a flight on Friday, those flights will become available at the GoWild price if they are available. They're not always available. If they are going to be available, they will usually come available at midnight the night before. So that means Wednesday night at midnight, that's when those will become available. Now, that's a little tricky because sometimes tickets might still become available for the GoWild rate after midnight throughout that next day, but usually they'll become available at midnight. The other caveat is sometimes they're available in advance. For the trip to San Antonio and Orlando, those both, I booked all of those at the midnight the day before time. For some reason, the New York City flights were available 2 weeks before at the GoWild price. So I don't know why. I knew that sometimes could happen. I just didn't expect it to happen on what I would expect to be such a popular route. But they were. So I was able to plan that one somewhat in advance, a couple weeks in advance. Now, it should be noted with the international flights, you can book those. Those become available, I think, 10 days in advance. It should be noted, though, Frontier only flies to the Caribbean, Central America. So their international destinations are fairly limited. But those are some pretty sweet places to be able to go last minute. But that brings me to the other inconvenience, which is if you're staying there more than 24 hours wherever you're headed, you cannot book your return flight until you're already there, which for a lot of people isn't going to work. You got to know that you can get home and when you can get home. So I think the biggest key, and we'll get to all this later in the video, but I think the biggest key that determines whether this is right for you or not is flexibility. How much flexibility do you have in your travel plans? Another thing to note is that while the GoWild fares don't become available until midnight the day before, they do often offer a GoWild rate before that, which is reduced from the regular ticket price. So if you do need to book it in advance, even if you're not able to get the $16 GoWild rate, often if a flight is undersold and has space, they will make it available at a discounted GoWild rate before that. For example, I'm just making up these numbers, but an example might be the regular price is $150. The GoWild price, of course, would be $16 at midnight the night before. But they might offer that $150 flight for $110, for example, to GoWild members if you want to book it in advance. I dove pretty deep into the Reddit threads and the GoWild Pass Facebook groups in advance. So I had my expectations in the gutter because I knew, not in the gutter, but I was realistic about how viable this was. I definitely didn't go into it expecting to get whatever flight I wanted any day that I wanted. There also are a number of blackout dates, which are not excessive, but I think it does come out to like 28 or 30 blackout dates throughout the week. It's your typical holidays, spring break times that you would expect flights to be full. But from those Reddit threads and Facebook groups, I learned that there are ways to get a sense of whether those GoWild fares will be available or not. So if you're savvy, you can get a sense and plan to a certain extent, but you always have to remember they're never guaranteed. They are never, ever guaranteed to be available. So you can't get angry if they're looking like they're going to be available and then they're not. It's just part of the deal. A few things worked a lot better than I expected. First of all, I expected to be more frustrated with availability. I expected it to be a little more unpredictable. And like I said, I was able to use those tips and tricks, which maybe I should make another video about those, to get a really pretty accurate sense of whether they would be available or not. And that always worked out for me. It's only been a month, so maybe I just got lucky, but it worked out pretty well. I was also really, really worried about luggage because we all know how Frontier works. They give you a very, very, very low base price, and then everything but the oxygen costs money once you get there. We know how aggressive they are with their baggage policies. They now charge you $20 if you need to go speak to a gate agent at check-in. So if you don't check in yourself, you have to pay $20 to go talk to a human. I have opinions about that. But I I've been pleasantly surprised. I knew how strict they were about their baggage policy, especially their personal item policy, because you get one personal item for free. But I'm sure we've all seen the viral videos from a couple years ago where we learned that the gate agents are financially incentivized to catch you with a personal item that doesn't fit in their sizer. Those videos were examples of bags that clearly fit in the sizer, and they were still getting charged $50 on the spot. So this is maybe the thing that I was most worried about. And I was using the Cotopaxi Alpa 28-liter pack, which technically is too big, but it's compressible. So if it's not packed full, it easily goes into the sizer. But I was pretty nervous because the whole purpose of this pass is completely defeated if I'm getting a $16 fare, but then paying $150 to check bags and all that jazz. So that was my biggest concern. But I was meticulous about packing light. I made sure that it fit in the sizer. And on only one of my flights were they aggressively, and I do mean aggressively, checking the personal item size. But they didn't ask me to size mine, so I guess visually mine must pass muster. Or, you know what? She may have just been too busy, because the time they were aggressively checking bags, 2 different customers were screaming at the gate agent, and she was pretty fiery back at them, and there was a lot going on. So I may have just slipped through the chaos because of the chaos, but nonetheless, I have been fine with that bag as my personal item on every flight. Another consideration with Frontier's strategy of offering a super low base fare, but then charging for every upgrade, is your seat selection. You have to be flexible and completely willing to sit wherever they put you, because you have no control over it without paying. And in my mind, if I am paying $30, $50, $75 for those front seats with the empty middle seat, if I'm paying that amount of money to select my seat, it starts to negate the low cost. So I've also told myself that except for rare instances, I won't pay to choose my seat. I've only been stuck in a middle seat once, and it was on the way home from New York City. And it was awful. I mean, it was fine. I survived, of course, but I'm 6'2", almost 300 pounds. I'm a big human, and it wasn't comfortable. Luckily, the people sitting next to me were smaller people. I don't hang over the seat, but I'm just not a small person. I also have long legs, and it was really uncomfortable, but I've accepted that that is just part of this deal. Now, once I did pay $25 to sit in those front seats with the empty middle seat. They're usually at least $75, I think, for most of the flights I've flown on. I think it varies. But most of the times I've looked, it's been around $75, which again, not paying that because it defeats the purpose of this low-cost pass. But for some reason, right before I checked in for the flight to New York, it had dropped to $26. So I did pay for that. I felt like that was worth it. And I will pay for it again, especially for a longer flight like that, if it's around $25. That's worth it to me. I think I just have to accept that I might have to pay full fare to get home if I don't have flexibility. 2 of those trips were just one-day trips, so I was able to get the return flight before I ever left. But the flight to Orlando for my dad's surgery was very open-ended, and I couldn't do that. So it worked out, though. The day I needed to come back, there was a flight available. Tampa is a very there's a lot of flights on Frontier out of Tampa, Orlando as well. So that was a good place to have that uncertainty. But that is one thing that I'm still concerned about. At some point, I know I'm going to end up somewhere, and it's going to be frustrating to get back. So I've just operated under the mindset that if I'm not able to get the return flight before I leave, I have to know that I either have to be flexible or I have to be ready to buy a full fare flight home. Another thing I've been pleasantly surprised with was that all of the flight attendants and gate agents, for the most part, were really, really friendly and lovely. And I think it's easy for the negative experiences people have to go viral and really color the perception. And obviously those experiences did happen. They're on video, but I didn't experience those. And I was expecting a bit more of a budget experience. And I think the only place where I really felt that I was on an ultra low cost carrier are the seats. They're awful. they're terrible. They're so uncomfortable. They have two different variations. On their shorter flights, they're these plastic seats with near no cushion, and they don't recline, and they're not good. They're very uncomfortable. They are, especially as a bigger person. They're very uncomfortable. Their longer flights have a different style of seat. They still don't recline, but they do have a little bit more padding, but it's still not great. I would say, hands down, that has been the most noticeable, impactful downgrade for me from Delta to Frontier is seat comfort. There's also no option to buy first class, although it sounds like that might be changing soon. The only option they have are a few rows in the front. They do block off the middle seats. I can't remember what they call those seats, but you can pay an amount of money to sit in one of those where you're guaranteed to have an empty middle seat. So that's nice. And while I avoided the fees from checking bags, one thing that did get me, I love a cocktail on a plane. I love a cocktail on a plane. And I like a snack too. So almost every flight, I ended up having a couple gin and tonics, a cheese tray. And so while I avoided those bag fees, I definitely racked up $30 to $40, $50 in food and beverage on each flight. So also something to consider. I would have done that. On Delta, I almost never pay for drinks because of my status. I either often get upgraded to first class where all beverages are free of charge, or I get a ton of free beverage coupons every year. And so I haven't paid for a cocktail on a Delta flight in years. So that was new. So who does the GoWild Pass make sense for? Well, it makes sense for people with a lot of flexibility in their travel. It makes sense for people who can travel very light, either only with a personal item or with, a checked bag or two. Now, there are ways to get free checked bags. On Frontier, the credit card, I think, is the best way from how it sounds. So there are ways to get affordable checked bags, but if you're not a card holder or don't meet one of the other conditions, you do have to be able to travel super duper light. You also have to accept that you're on Frontier. It's an ultra low cost carrier. And I would argue that they do what they do at the price they do it very well, but it's not Delta. It's not United. It's not a major US carrier. That it's just not. It is what it is. I think this pass also is not for an anxious traveler. If you are someone who travels and you tend to be anxious about planning and how's this going to go and how's that going to go, and it makes you uncomfortable to the point of ruining your trip to have that uncertainty, this isn't for you. This definitely is not for you. This also isn't for people with limited PTO who have to plan in advance and don't have that kind of flexibility. It's also not for people who are traveling to events that they cannot miss. This is definitely a last minute travel option. Who is it great for? Well, it's been great for me. I have tons of flexibility. I do this for work, so it has been a great way to create new content. I have a ton of flexibility. I work for myself. I am my own boss, so I can do kind of what I want when I want. I'm also a very experienced and therefore very relaxed traveler. I have to admit, I've shown up in foreign countries and realized that I hadn't booked a hotel yet. I often book last-minute hotels. So this is not scary to me. It's not anxiety-inducing for me to have that uncertainty. So it's great for me. I could also see it being great for a college student who wants to be able to fly home on the weekends. I could see it being great for grandparents who want to be able to go see their grandkids at an affordable price for a few days here and there. Even if I didn't do this for work, I am a roller coaster enthusiast. So the reason I got the Six Flags All Parks Pass and a Universal Orlando Pass this year is because it's now very affordable for me to pop to all of these parks, even if it's just a day trip to go ride a few roller coasters and fly back home. I can also see it being great for a business owner who might have businesses in multiple cities and needs to easily pop between them often. That would be a great solution for them as well. So there are my 1 month in thoughts. I know that they will change. I'll do another check-in, maybe at 6 months or maybe at a year. I think the things I'm watching for most are availability. I don't know if I've been lucky, and I'm also looking out for the first time I need to really rely on their customer service team, because you cannot call them, I think. You can only chat with them. And I have a feeling that's when Frontier fails. It feels like Frontier is fine when things go right. It seems like when you have a delayed flight, when you have a canceled flight, when you have a lost bag, it seems like it can be very frustrating to get the help that you need in a timely, efficient, effective manner. So I think those are the two things that I'm watching out for most. So I hope this was helpful. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'll answer if I can. And keep an eye out for a 6-month check-in. And fingers crossed, it stays as good as it's been so far. See you next time, y'all. Y'all, thanks for watching that video. That was sweet of you. If you want to watch another one, click here. If you want to join one of my group trips, click here. Okay, want to see something pretty?